Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Camille Moore with Connect, and I'd like to thank you for tuning into How to Negotiate Wi-Fi Prices with Will Curran. Before we get started, just a few housekeeping notes on the platform. You can type in your questions for Will in the chat box on the right-hand side of your screen or via the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'd like this to be an interactive session, so please send in questions throughout the webinar. If you notice at the bottom of your screen, you will see several widgets. One with a paper fold is where you can download a handout of this presentation for you to keep for your records. A recorded version of this session will be available on demand on our websites, where you can find additional on-demand webinars for any of you needing last-minute credit hours before CMP testing. Yes, you're able to watch our sessions on demand and still receive credits. For everyone joining us live today, the credit is pending approval from the EIC. Once the credit is approved, we will email your certificate. For any of you future viewers watching this session on demand and not live, please email me directly at cmoore@connectmeetings to receive your certificate. I will go ahead and type my email address for everyone to have. Before I introduce Will, you will notice a map on your screen about the upcoming events for Connect for 2019. If you have any questions, please contact my coworker, Kristen Francis, Senior Director of Sales at kfrancis@connectmeetings.com, and I will type in her email address for you as well. Now, without further ado, it's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Will Curran. As founder of Endless Events, Will Curran has been named one of the 40 under 40 event industry leaders, 35 entrepreneurs under the age of 35, and Inc. magazine's coolest college startup, all before graduating college. Will has been producing events since high school when he started his first company and has now worked in production of large event clients such as Emerald City Comic-Con, Anheuser-Busch, Color Run, Morton Salt, and Uber. His team's mission is to simplify the event planning process by creating the equation for an event's perfect solution. They also relentlessly seek to be the name in customer service in the events industry. From event logistics to business development to technical production, Curran has a diverse background in growing events and companies to the next level. Will, welcome, and thank you for sharing with us today.
Thank you so much for having me, Camille. It's so awesome to be back with all of my awesome Connect webinar peeps. For those who didn't tune in, we did an awesome one on how to negotiate AV quotes and prices and all that jazz, which is very similar to what we're going to be talking about today, but we're going to be talking about Wi-Fi today, which ironically, I am broadcasting to you live from Bantry, Ireland, where I am working today. I work remotely, so I'm all over the world, and ironically, I have absolutely the worst Wi-Fi ever. So this is just the most appropriate topic I think I could ever have. But I want to give some shout outs to everybody tuning in right now. If you didn't see, I asked in the chat, where is everybody joining us from? So if you want to post that into the chat, I see Leah tuning in from Cincinnati, Toma tuning in from Minneapolis, Bonnie King coming from Dunkin' Brands. I don't know if that's an actual city, but if it is, I hope that I can come visit Dunkin' Brands. We got Peachtree City, Georgia, Boca Raton, Florida, Stillwater, Minnesota, Boston. Oh my gosh, lots of East Coasters today. East Coast doing strong. Apparently the West Coast is not quite woken up. So if you are representing the West Coast, make sure to represent in the chat right now. Well, I'm really excited to be here to be talking about how to negotiate hotel Wi-Fi. As an AV nerd and somebody who produces a lot of events and does a lot of technical production, we are finding that it used to be AV was the thing that everyone worried about, but now it's all about Wi-Fi, and no one wants to deal with these insane prices. So real quick check of hands. I want to keep you guys engaged. So in the chat, if you've ever had it where you felt like you've spent too much on Wi-Fi, go ahead and post a 1, like the number 1 in the chat. If you've ever felt like you've paid too much for Wi-Fi for an event, or maybe as an attendee or an exhibitor, whatever it may be, I would love to know in the chat. Just go ahead and post a 1. I'd love to see you guys are all awake. And oh my gosh, they are flooding in now. Wow, John, Mandy, Jillian, Gerald, Angie, Christine, oh my gosh, Katie, oh my, I think it's a resounding 100% that you guys have all spent too much money on Wi-Fi. Well, today we're going to talk a little bit about some tips, some feedback, some ideas for how you can potentially negotiate this, not necessarily get rid of it down to 0, but at least come in more informed so you can make the best decisions. So if you guys are ready, let's jump right on in. By the way, throughout my entire presentation, feel free to post this on your Instagram stories or on Twitter. Anything I say, feel free to quote me. Use tag @HelloEndless, like you're saying, hello, Endless. Just feel free to tag us on Twitter, Instagram. I'd love to hear your takeaways and what you learned a lot. But let's jump right on in. Well, when it comes to hotel Wi-Fi, I like to say, welcome to the wild, wild west when it comes to everything. Like I was saying, we do a lot with, AV in production for events. And about, 7 years ago, 10 years ago when I first started this company, AV was kind of this wild, wild west space where clients were getting forced into in-house AV restrictions and having to, pick basically, okay, if I want to utilize this AV company from the outside, well, now I'm getting all these restrictions, these extra fees, these penalties, or sometimes not even being allowed to bring in a third-party AV company. Well, I think you as the planners have finally wised up and realized that you do have the power to negotiate this and get rid of the AV restrictions. And, hooray, that's fantastic. And I'm really excited because obviously as a third-party AV company, I love to hear that people have the power to choose, obviously. Well, what's kind of happened is you can never doubt the ability for a hotel and airline to find a way to make another dollar. And now they've realized the wild, wild west is Wi-Fi and internet and networking for events. And what they've realized is that before planners used to think that AV was confusing. They weren't sure what to do. And, oh, man, I'll just work with the in-house. I don't have a choice. Well, now it's kind of happened is that people feel like for Wi-Fi, that's the same case. And so what ends up happening is that a lot of times we get stuck with these gigantic bills. Obviously, with all those ones that we're seeing in the chat, we're getting stuck with these gigantic bills. You're hearing things like, for example, hey, okay, yeah, you can bring a third-party AV company in, but remember that free Wi-Fi we're going to give you? Well, now it's going to be $30,000. Oh, my gosh, that's a nightmare, right? $30,000 for Wi-Fi, especially if you have a small conference, can be crippling to the budget. But we're in this day and age where almost Wi-Fi is needed, right? With all the event apps and all the audience engagement systems using Wi-Fi, you have to have it. So how can we get these prices down? And I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about the things that you need to be evaluating and some things that you might consider obvious, but something to just kind of think about when it comes to your Wi-Fi. So we're going to start with a really, really basic question when it comes to networking providers, Wi-Fi, everything like that. And that question is, can I bring my own network provider? This was the same question, again, that we talked about 10 years ago. Can I bring in my own AV company to a venue? Well, now the question is, can I bring my own network provider in? Someone who can take care of the internet, do all the wiring, do all the networking, the security. And here's the really simple answer. It's yes. And yep, I'm a mic drop moment right there. I'm just gonna webinar's done. You guys know you have the power to bring whoever you want to bring in. All good to go, right? No, that's not enough. Obviously, guys, you can always bring your own networking provider. Just like you can bring in your own third-party AV company, you can bring in a third-party internet provider. It is possible, and we're going to talk about how you can do that in a little bit. But if you are stuck already in utilizing the third-party, the in-house Wi-Fi provider and networking provider, we're going to have some strategies for how you can at least make sure you're getting the best out of it. But the big thing going into this is know that there are companies out there like Endless, like many others, that can bring in networking infrastructure to your event. And you can do the same thing you do with your AV and bid the in-house versus the third party. That's something to really keep in mind when we go through this entire process. So as we're kind of jumping into it, by the way, if you guys have any questions, just feel free to throw them into the question and answer panel, and I would love to answer them. On some of them I'll get to while I'm talking and maybe even hit on them as we go along, but feel free to answer those questions. I also love if you have experiences with this, share it in the chat, and I would love to hear you guys' opinions on it as well. So, okay, so we know now, hey, I can bring in a third-party Wi-Fi networking provider for my events. Well, the question is, well, I brought this up to my venue, and they say, no, it's not possible. Oh, we can't do that. We forbid it. We don't allow it. All these things like that. Well, there's this old saying that happens, and you know what they say? Negotiating, everything before the contract is considered negotiating, right? That before you sign that contract, you can do almost anything you want, right? You can ask for anything you want. What do you call after the contract is signed? So if before the contract is called negotiating, after the contract is called, we'll wait for it, dramatic effect, begging. Anything after you sign the contract is considered begging. So something to really keep in mind is if you are looking at bringing a third-party network provider in, shout outs to Elizabeth for being first off the gate with saying begging. Thank you, Elizabeth. If you are, already signed into the venue contract, you are kind of forced into utilizing whoever they say. They might have some restrictions on there, like, for example, no one can touch our networking infrastructure. You have to use this for Wi-Fi, whatever it may be. So the important thing to go into and the thing to keep remembering through this entire process is that now you know you can bring in your own third-party company. Well, now you know you need to negotiate them before the contract is signed. And most importantly, you want to make sure that all these things we're going to talk about when it comes to evaluations is done before you sign the contract. Just in the same way that you're evaluating things like food and beverage, the hotel rooms, the pre-function space, the electrical needs, all those sort of things. It seems like Wi-Fi is just the thing that gets forgotten in the last. They say, oh, it's going to work, right? So we're in a modern day city. And it's funny because if you look at the example where I am right now in Bantry, Ireland, I thought to myself, yep, I'll book myself in the nicest hotel, like in this area. I'm sure they're going to have fast Wi-Fi, right? Well, it was my problem that I didn't do my due diligence. I didn't call ahead. And it turns out West Cork, which is the area that I'm in, tends to have really poor internet. And when talking to the locals and talking to the front desk staff, they said, yeah, pretty much the Wi-Fi we have here is the best we get, and it's still pretty poor. So that's something to really keep in mind is that had I, called ahead and started talking about this before I booked the hotel room I'm in right now, I could be probably coming in at a little bit better internet and having maybe a little bit better of a connection. So again, don't do this after you sign the contract. Do this before you sign the contract. So you might be thinking to yourself, okay, well, let's say that I've already signed the contract, but I want to make sure that I'm getting what I need, right? Or let's say that you are worried about, beforehand, let's say you haven't signed the contract, you want to compare providers, or let's say you want to make sure that the provider that is giving you the internet access, the network you need, you want to make sure that it's all listed out and done properly, right? What are all the things you should be thinking about? Well, the good news is we're going to be answering that question. What should you be evaluating when it comes to your Wi-Fi? Very, very interesting on here. Deborah brings up a good point that someone recently told her that the hotel contracts with their internet providers say they can't actually resell Wi-Fi service. Obviously, there's always a really interesting thing with that. Recently as well, a really great player in the space when it comes to internet providers for the events industry actually won a battle with the FCC, saying that you're not forced into one company on property. You can't force anyone to have to utilize that Wi-Fi. It's basically, you can feel free to look up the court battle when it comes to event Wi-Fi and FCC. I'm sure if you Google it, you can find the court proceedings. So the important thing though is that really, to be honest, yes, they can't technically resell internet. Technically, I guess they can, just like in theory, they also resell utilities like electrical for your event. But the thing to keep in mind is that if you sign that contract, you're stuck in whatever they have signed you into, and you're going to have a lot less negotiating power, right? Versus getting it done up in the upfront. Karen, you bring up a really great question, which I can definitely answer probably towards the end, but how expensive is it to bring a third-party internet provider in? It depends. That's the biggest answer when it comes to it. I know that's not the answer you're looking for, but it depends on a lot of the stuff that I'm about to cover when it comes to the evaluation portion. What are your needs? All these things like that. sometimes for really heavy internet needs, it's actually cheaper to bring a third-party internet provider. But if, for example, if you're just looking for 100 connections and pretty basic stuff, it might be more expensive to bring a third-party provider in. But again, your provider should be able to detail all that out. And, the important thing to know is that ultimately you want to make sure that you have the choice to choose between a third party or the in-house, but also have the ability to bid it out, to have people come down in price, and you're not getting locked into $30,000 or nothing. And that's the last thing that you want. So, all right, we'll definitely jump into that a little bit more, but again, let's talk about what should you be evaluating when it comes to your Wi-Fi. Well, I have really, really good news for you guys. We did an entire webinar on this exact topic, just the things that you should be evaluating when it comes to your Wi-Fi. So I'm not sure if you guys can click on your screen and click on the link on there, but if you head to bit.ly/improve your Wi-Fi, and you plug that into your browser, I'm hoping you guys can click on that link right there. It should take you over. You can sign up for our webinar. We literally dive into this a lot deeper. I have to obviously breeze through because I only have 15 minutes, or not 15 minutes, but I have 45 minutes left, and I want to get to your question and answer. But definitely go check out that webinar. We dive into this a lot deeper, and we also talk about what you should be evaluating when it comes to your audience engagement softwares, everything like that. But go to bit.ly/improve your Wi-Fi. Really quickly, I'm going to post that in the chat. Typing. Oh, and look, Camille beat me to it. Thank you, Camille. Camille posted a link in the chat as well that you guys should be able to click and get that in there as well. So let's jump into the first thing that you should be evaluating. And this one's not the obvious thing. It's your cell phone coverage. You might be thinking to yourself, well, Will, why does it matter about my my cell phone coverage, right? And what's interesting is that when it comes to your cell phone coverage, you always want to make sure that you're testing to make sure your wet venue has good cell phone coverage. For example, if you're in the basement, 30 levels deep on the in a convention center and you have poor cell reception, it means a lot more people are going to want Wi-Fi, are going to need Wi-Fi. However, if you have really great cell coverage, you can get away with having a little bit slower internet or maybe less connections or not offering it at all because, to be honest, we all have pretty fast internet connections built into our phones these days. Almost half of us carry hotspots with us as well. So if you have really, really great cell coverage, you aren't going to need Wi-Fi as much. However, when you are evaluating your venues and you're talking to your venues, if they have poor cell phone coverage, it means that you for sure want to make sure that you have really, really good Wi-Fi, right? Because if you don't have good cell coverage and you're not offering Wi-Fi, well, people might be completely disconnected. How am I going to post things on Instagram? Well, if you have an audience engagement platform, how am I supposed to get in there and ask questions? How am I supposed to engage? How am I supposed to get the show floor map? All that sort of stuff, right? We want to make sure that we have this. So always consider cell phone coverage a big part of your venue evaluation. All right, let's jump into the next one, which is the obvious one, speed. Right? Everyone wants to talk about speed. How fast is your internet connection? Here's some quick tips for you. Whenever you're talking about internet connection, you always want to make sure you're talking about megabits per second. Megabits per second, I should say. Reason why you want to talk about megabits versus megabytes is that megabits, that there are 8 bits in a byte. So, for example, if you are, asking for something to be 8 megabytes per second, it's actually 1 megabit per second. So you always want to make sure that when you're evaluating internet, you'll be able to tell this because it will be a capital M for megabits per second versus megabytes per second. So, all right. So you kind of know that when it comes to speed, how to kind of talk about it now, right? How are you going to evaluate that speed as megabits per second? One important thing to know about when it comes to your speed is how well does it hold up over time as well. For example, when you get a lot of people into the room, when there's a lot of devices, there's a really, really good handy chart that we talk about in that webinar that I posted before, the Improve Your Wi-Fi webinar, where we talk about, for example, if you're doing a 4K live stream, this is how much internet you need. If you're doing a HD live stream, this is how much you're going to need. The important thing to know when it comes to your speeds, though, is that a lot of this stuff is very easily able to be found online. So you want to make sure that you can keep up with the speeds of what you're looking for. If you're looking for just casual internet, email browsing and, simple posting stuff on social media, you might need a lot less speed than you think. So again, go check out that webinar. We'll talk a little bit about what kind of speeds are good. And ultimately, what speed is going to be considered good depends on what you're going to be doing. I know just like the cost, again, it depends. This is a very, very, a very, very big thing is to make sure that you'll know exactly what you're going to be doing and what you're going to be using. All right. Yeah. So Heather asked if I can post the abbreviations for megabits versus megabytes. I will go ahead and post that in the chat. So you can see capital M in megabits per second versus megabytes, which is a lowercase m. And Holly posted a really good link, which ironically is the most popular page on the PSAV website, is the bandwidth calculator they use. It's absolutely fantastic. We'll be having one coming out of our own as well really soon that will really help you guys out. So, all right, so we talked a little bit about speed when it comes to bandwidth and everything like that. The next thing we want to talk about is coverage when you're evaluating. Because you know what? If they, for example, show you this one screen grab from speedtest.net, again, by the way, if you're testing internet speeds, I highly recommend speedtest.net is a great website to do that. But also fast.com is great. Really quickly while I go back to speed and talk about these two different websites, I always recommend testing both sites. The reason why is that some internet providers will optimize speedtest.net to look faster than it really is. However, fast.com uses Netflix's servers, so you can actually tell if they're crippling the Wi-Fi across the bands that Netflix uses and things like that. So always test fast.com as well, in addition to speedtest.net when it comes to your internet. These will be really helpful tools for you to test the speeds and see how they're doing. But again, if someone sends you a screenshot of speedtest.net and says, look, we have very fast Wi-Fi, right? Well, it doesn't answer a key question when it comes to coverage. For example, that picture could have been taken when you were sitting, right in the middle of the biggest ballroom that has the best coverage. But, how is the coverage down the hallway? How is it, in the bathrooms? How is it in all the breakout rooms? You want to make sure that you test all of this. And yes, I am saying fast.com. Candy, thank you so much for letting me re-say that. So you want to make sure you test the coverage across the entire venue that you're working in, not just in the area, one single area. The important thing to know as well is, do you have outdoor events? Do the outdoor events need to have good Wi-Fi coverage as well? And the reason why this is important is that as you start to ask these sort of questions, your provider should be able to address them directly and say whether, yes, we can provide great coverage right outside on the patio, or yeah, we can, reach the pool where we're doing the happy hour, that sort of stuff. But if you are going out there and it doesn't have good coverage, you need to talk to them about getting additional coverage, which is always possible. Whenever someone says, oh yeah, there's no good internet connection out here, it is always possible to get internet coverage out somewhere. It just depends on the infrastructure and the cost. So again, make sure that your coverage is really, really good. I'm going to have a bonus tip all the way at the end. If you're starting to feel overwhelmed and you're starting to feel like, well, how do I test speed and how do I test the coverage and know what has good coverage and all these things like that, I have one catch-all amazing tip for you guys, and I'm going to save for the very end to tell you guys all about. But the short and sweet of it is that you always want to make sure that you ask the hard questions of your provider. And the reason why you ask the hard questions is that if they cannot come back with a simple to easy to understand answer, my philosophy is that they are purposely trying to confuse you. I think this goes apart not just for, Wi-Fi, but also for AV as well. If someone is saying, hey, oh yeah, in order to do that, we need to bring the Megabox 5062, and you know what? That doesn't interface with the RGB, Clearcom 4200. If that's happening for you, then you are going to have a major issue, and that, hey, this person might be not trying to explain this in a simple to understand manner. And the reason why I like to say that can always be explained in a simple and easy to understand manner is because it always can be. Everything can be brought into layman's term, and that is very easy to understand. So, all right, so we talked a little bit about coverage. Let's talk a little bit about capacity. Whoops, as I jump all over the place. Capacity. Not only do you have good coverage, but also what are the capacity of access points? An access point, the best way to describe it is like the router that you have in your in your home for your Wi-Fi. It's that box that you plug everything into. The closer you get to it, the stronger the signal is. The further you get away from it, the less strong the signal is, right? That's basically considered an access point. Well, when you're dealing with large venues and hotels, they tend to have these all spread throughout. And the reason why they do that is that if you had everyone connecting to a single access point, one single spot of internet, sometimes they can get congested and have major issues. It can't handle a lot of people, all that sort of stuff. But a great question to ask is, what are the capacities of each access point? For example, if you are going to be putting 5,000 people into a ballroom, you sure want to make sure that the access points in there can handle 5,000 people, and it's not rated for 100 people. Again, your provider should be able to explain this to you and should hopefully have this covered for you. But it's something really important to know, because you can have really fast coverage, really good coverage. You can have really fast internet, and a single person walks in and does a speed test, and man, look, I'm getting 100 megabits per second down. This looks amazing, right? But then, when you put 5,000 people in that room, not only, even if they aren't all downloading stuff simultaneously, but just even being connected to it, sometimes the internet can throttle and have issues. That can't be good at all. So make sure that the capacity of those access points where you're actually physically connecting to are really, really good and can handle the different areas that you're going to be in. All right, here we go. Next thing you want to evaluate is the ability to scale. When it comes to your internet, for example, if you're looking at a long-term venue relationship for years and years and years, for example, let's say you are starting off and you have 1,000 people come to your event, but in 10 years from now, you're going to have 100,000 people. You want to make sure that the network has the ability to scale over a long period of time. However, you also want to make sure that it has the ability to scale over a short period of time. Similar to that capacity of access points, if you go from having, one person in your venue to all of a sudden there's 100,000 people, suddenly, does the network have the ability to throttle up and get to that scale very, very quickly? Again, it all depends. Talk to your vendor, and they should be able to answer this sort of stuff for you pretty easily. You want to make sure that it has the ability to scale, because the last thing you want is that, everything's great when there's 100 people, but now there's 1,000. Oh, now we're having issues, right? All right, some good questions kind of coming in. Is it important to know the access point locations? Yes, yes and no. No, if the coverage is great, right? It doesn't really matter, right, where they decide to put them or anything like that. However, if you, for example, know that there's one single access point covering 10 breakout rooms, and you're going to have a lot of people going across that, and you don't think the capacity is going to be there, oh, yikes. Yeah, you definitely want to make sure that you know where that is, and that might be a great question. In my opinion, if you're really interested in this stuff, it doesn't hurt to ask, right? To have these sort of conversations, and the people who are into networking love to talk about this sort of stuff. And, you want to make sure that you are always giving it a try, and always just, starting a conversation about it as well. All right, so Brian asks, I've just tried the bandwidth calculator, and it maxes out 1,000 users for 1,000 users, and for 100 it says you need 81 megabits per second. My convention has 2,000 attendees. Should I just double the number? It depends. Again, Brian, when it comes to the capacity and the speed that you're looking for, things I would ask is, for example, what is going across that network? Are you having a lot of attendees post photos on social media? If you're running into an issue where, for example, people are uploading lots of video content, or a lot of people are using an audience engagement app, you might need more speed. So I would definitely recommend talk to your service provider to basically talk to them about what are people going to actually be doing on that network as well. So, all right, great question so far. All right, next question. The next thing to evaluate has to do with the dreaded big trend of 2019 that I am just preaching on so much, which is security. When we've gone across all the tech trends across the entire industry, security is usually up there in number 2. Just like we have physical security at our events, you need to make sure that you have equal security for your networking as well. This is something that's very, very easily forgotten a lot of the time. You always want to make sure that you are really having a great security when it comes to your Wi-Fi. The reason why is because you have a lot of sensitive information when it comes to your crossing across your networks. For example, you might have proprietary information with new plans. You might have, attendee data flowing through with credit cards and this and this and that, right? So you want to make sure that you have really, really good security. I can talk about this one for nearly an hour. And the good news is I already did. I hosted a webinar with Brant Kruger all about security and cybersecurity for events. This was my number one trend for this year, is something that we need to be focusing on as an industry, because we have for example, with the Marriott hack, there's just so much information at stake here, guys. So if you go to bit.ly/connect Wi-Fi security, again, bit.ly/connect Wi-Fi security, and Camille posted a link down in the chat. Go ahead and click on that. Another amazing webinar where we talk about for an hour all the security risks when it comes to your event and all the questions that you need to be asking when it comes to your security of your networking and at your events when it comes to technology. Again, I can talk about this one for an hour on its own, but you want to ask about it. What are you guys doing for security? So the quick tips that I recommend: always make sure that there is a actual secured password on the network. I'm not talking about when you connect and it pops up and says, enter on a web browser this Wi-Fi password. It's, Aruba 3039 in order to get into the Wi-Fi. I'm talking about when you connect to the network, it has a little lock next to it, and you have to enter the password before you can even connect to it. You want to make sure that you have a network password on. The reason why is it will encrypt the data across the network and make sure it's good to go. That's one really quick tip I have for you. Second thing I have as well is make sure that your team has someone there to monitor it to make sure the security is good. Last thing you want to have is someone spoof up a fake network nearby. People start connecting to it and all their information gets shared. All right, so we got a question from Ali, I'm guessing, or Ali. I apologize. I'll say Ali. Ali, what is a fair price to pay for meeting space Wi-Fi if I have an app? What is a fair price I need to pay for a stream session? See, that's what's really interesting about that question as well, is as we kind of talk about this, is what's a fair price anymore? And honestly, because we're in the wild, wild west, because a lot of people are getting forced into their connection, into their networks, into the provider they're using, to be honest, prices are wildly varying right now. I think that we're not going to see a very consistent price across the board until more and more planners start to negotiate this stuff out of their contracts, and the hotels start to go, oh gosh, we can't rely on charging, outrageous prices when it comes to Wi-Fi. So best recommendation I have for you is get quotes from a couple different vendors when it comes to it, and ask about all these the evaluative kind of criteria when it comes to it, and make sure that you're comparing them all apples to apples. What's the speeds? Is it the same? Is the security the same? Is is the capacity the same? All these sort of things like that. Thing I recommend is if you are doing a streaming session, and for example, you are doing an actual full-on live stream with multiple cameras, all that sort of stuff, make sure that is done wired. That's one tip I don't have in here right now, is that anything that you need a constant, secure, fast, reliable internet, make sure you negotiate in a wired connection. The two areas that as an AV person I will highly recommend is obviously your live stream. The second area that most people tend to forget about too is the place where all the presentations are getting downloaded. If your AV company doesn't have all the AV presentations beforehand, make sure that you have a wired internet connection for the person who is downloading all the presentations. I can't tell you how many times that we've been there and thought the internet was going to be great, and then we utilize the same Wi-Fi everyone else is using. It tanks and has an issue. Now we can't download the CEO's presentation who sent it to us 5 minutes ago. You want to make sure that you have that in there as well. So Ali says, who are vendors outside the hotel? Is it who you'd use and home, like Frontier, Spectrum? Sometimes I have seen it where sometimes the actual internet provider, ISP as it's called, can provide some solutions, but they usually won't do the networking inside as well. They might only provide you the drop of the internet, and then you have to kind of take it from there. Best recommendation, Ali, is just to reach out to me. I'll post my contact information at the end, and I will happily connect you with someone who can help out with that. And it just depends on the market and who's good and different areas, but there are a lot of options. You can even bring in things like, for example, bonded internet connections with, Wi-Fi hotspots across multiple networks. Oh my gosh, there's so much tech nerd stuff I could talk about for days on this end, but that's me getting a little pitchy as well, but there's a lot of solutions when it comes to everything. Yeah. So, Anita's asking, we are finding a lot of hotels do not own their Wi-Fi AV, causing us to sign two different contracts. Is this norm? Yeah, a lot of hotels are, utilizing third-party companies who I won't name because that will protect the innocent or the guilty, whichever way you look at it. And those companies are then contracted by the hotel, similar to in-house AV companies, are contracted to provide the internet for the venue. So you do end up signing two different contracts. The important thing is to make sure your venue contract doesn't lock you into the contract with that in-house vendor specifically. If it's one of those things where the venue itself is providing the Wi-Fi, you want to make sure that obviously that's not locking you in as well. So a lot of different stuff in there, guys. Wow, great questions. We can come back to this in the Q&A a little bit if I didn't clarify anything right off the bat, and happy to clarify a little bit more. But back again, we want to make sure that you have awesome security. Make sure that you head over to that, sign up for that webinar so you can all understand all the things you have to be thinking about when it comes to security. All right, so the next thing I want to talk about is the thing that most people tend to forget about. We think about the actual physical internet, right? We think about the physical, the speeds, all these things, but the thing we don't think about is the people managing it as well. When it comes to evaluating your Wi-Fi, you want to make sure that you have a layer of management. Here's two reasons why. First thing that you want to have is make sure that you have someone there to watch the security. We kind of teased at that a little bit earlier. Someone who can monitor the security, make sure everything's good to go, but also someone who can walk around, check the different access points, make sure that the coverage is still good, make sure if there's an issue, something can be fixed. I've seen it far too often where all of a sudden the Wi-Fi will tank and, oh, we're calling this person. Okay, they'll be down here in an hour because they have to come from another property and they manage 3 different properties. You want to make sure that you have someone on site to manage the entire process. And the reason why this is helpful is that if there are issues, you can troubleshoot them, just like you would never do a general session without having your AV and your audio guy and your lighting guy. You don't want to be left to the internet just for yourself because, to be honest, the internet might be working perfectly for you, but then an attendee complains and you don't know what's wrong. And, but if you have someone constantly monitoring it, you can make sure that's good to go. So make sure that you have great management. And that's also an area where they should be walking around with iPads with different tools, making sure everything works really, really well. And that's something that's really easy forgotten. Ask your vendor, what are you guys doing for management? Who's monitoring this? How is it all going to work? All right, next area that I want to talk about is the backup plan. What happens when all this goes down? What happens when your single ISP has an issue? Are there any sort of backup plans? When you're evaluating your vendors and who you're using, what happens when something doesn't work? Basically, what happens when things hit the fan, right? Is it that you guys have, this third-party option? Do you have this? What happens if, this happens? I mean, again, this is just a question to ask. Say, what's your guys' backup plan? What happens if there's an issue? And they should be able to provide you a backup plan as well. And kind of along that same lines as well, evaluate the guarantees as well. What guarantee do I have of speed? Yeah, everyone can say it's fast. Yeah, everyone can say the coverage is good. But what sort of guarantees do you have? Is there any measurement? Just like you want to measure the happiness of your attendees with net promoter score surveys, just like you want to make sure that the AV is working perfectly throughout and kind of on or off, you can also use data to manage how things are working for your Wi-Fi. How can I get guarantees that all my attendees will be able to connect and get this speed that you've guaranteed me? This is a great question to be able to ask. So, all right, so we talked about a lot of different evaluation methods and things that you should be asking about when it comes to your Wi-Fi and when it comes to evaluating a vendor. And again, to retrack again, remember you do have the power to bring in a third-party company, not just use the single one, and make sure that you negotiate this before that you sign a venue contract, not afterwards. But the last bonus tip that I have for you guys is to hire what I'm calling a networking liaison. This was one of the greatest tips. Ironically, we're having her on our podcast. Tomorrow, actually today's Wednesday, or no, today's Tuesday. I'm losing my mind. I'm in Ireland. Tomorrow on Event Icons on Wednesday, we are actually having the team behind GameStop on the show. And one of the greatest things I ever heard her say was that they actually hire someone who is a networking engineer who understands networks, who has done large-scale rollouts for gigantic office buildings, and they hire them as a third party, 1099, and they pay them for a couple site surveys. They pay them to be there during the event, and they pay them to be there afterwards. And they are basically that technical liaison for everything when it comes to networking. They monitor the security. They monitor the speeds. They hold the vendor accountable. If you don't think all this stuff that we've kind of talked about is confusing, it's, you don't, not what you want to work on, you want to focus on something else, or, this is all confusing you, hire someone on your team who can do this. Whether it's a vendor, whether it's an employee on your team, your IT guy who's in charge of rolling out all your networking, or, it's a third-party Wi-Fi vendor like Endless or something like that. Hire someone to be on your team who's got your back, who can call BS when someone says something that doesn't make sense, who can bring out the Wi-Fi meters, who can use all the tools, who can do the bandwidth calculations for you and ask the hard questions as well. That's a big suggestion I have for you. And that's something that GameStop implemented and immediately said, oh my gosh, this is so smart. All planners should do this. So one last bonus tip when it comes to hiring that networking liaison, all things to kind of look for. We have another bonus webinar for you guys to check out called How to Make Your Wi-Fi Not Suck. Actually, sorry, this isn't a webinar. This is the Event Icons episode we did with a third-party internet provider with an app company, and we talk about the hard details for how do you make sure that your Wi-Fi doesn't suck at your next event, right? Not just only how do you negotiate it, but what are all the criteria you look at? All these things like that. How do you bring it all together? What are good speeds? What is considered fair? What are the things you should be asking? Go check out that Event Icons episode. Again, it's just bit.ly/Wi-Fi not suck, right? Pretty simple, right? Just go over that URL and it's going to have a ton of awesome information for you. So go check that out. I think you guys can click a screen. It's also down in the chat. Thank you again, Camille, for posting that. And yeah, that's absolutely fantastic. All right, so I see the chat blowing up. So I know you guys have a ton of questions in here, so I want to jump into some questions. Camille, I'm not sure if you want to hop in with me and we can kind of jump in these questions, or you want me to tackle them myself.
Yeah,
the chat is absolutely blowing up.
Yes, I know you did answer quite a bit. So I think right here thank you answered Karen Phelps. How do I test if I'm not doing a site inspection?
Oh, that's a great question. So you can actually, that's where the networking liaison can be helpful. Maybe, for example, find someone who is local who can go down there and do it for you. But to be honest, if you aren't doing similar to the way that you would, if you're going out to look at a venue and, check out the ballroom, see if it's actually pretty, if you like it, all that sort of stuff. Just like that, you are at the mercy of the vendor hopefully telling the truth. Honestly, if you aren't able to get down there, I highly recommend bring in a liaison to be able to go check it for you. If not, you're just at the word of the vendor and hoping that they do the best. Obviously, you want to make sure to ask about guarantees as well at that point, but I would highly recommend not only doing a physical site survey, but also doing a technical site survey of the event as well.
Okay, next question I don't think you answered from Carol. Is it best to negotiate Wi-Fi separately from the remainder of the contract, i.e. guest rooms, meeting space?
Yeah, definitely. I highly recommend that. I think ultimately it's all going to come together at some point, right? For example, as you guys know, when negotiating hotel contracts, there's concessions that you're going to make to say like, okay, I'll be willing to pay full price on that, but I want a discount on this, or, and when you kind of look at it as a whole, the big thing that I recommend is that, do whatever your strategy when it comes to your hotel negotiations. Do whatever strategy you've seen best, but just make sure that it includes Wi-Fi. I think that's the biggest recommendation I have. I think a lot of times that it just gets forgotten, and I think someone posted in the chat and asked to, and kind of point out, shouldn't Wi-Fi just be free? And it just depends. Again, as far as what the hotel wants to charge, they can do whatever they want. It's the wild, wild west right now. But I think the recommendation I have for you is that just do whatever your negotiation strategy you think is best, and make sure that it's included, that you have it written, that you can bring in your own third-party vendor, and that you're going to bid it out just like you bid out everything else. Or you want to make sure that you nail all this criteria and you have the perfect solution before you sign that contract. I think the last thing you can do is say, oh, okay, you're going to take care of that? Cool, let me just sign off on that, and you're good to go. And shout outs to Matt for says it's free at his hotel. That's fantastic. Obviously, Matt, just to be on the side of the planners, I would just recommend that they highly test your internet, make sure that they ask all the same criteria, whether it's free or not. Just because it's free, I hope you don't disregard all the criteria. You want to make sure that it's just as equally awesome, and I'm sure it is. Thank you so much, Matt.
We have another question from Samantha I don't think you answered. She wants to know what kind of equipment would a third-party internet provider need to bring into a hotel in order to get not hotel non-hotel Wi-Fi?
Hotel Wi-Fi,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, does a vendor need insurance? Do they bring in satellite dishes? How do they get the internet to the hotel?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, Samantha. This is what we do. This is like where I get to get nerdy with you guys. So yeah, the cool thing is there's a lot of different options to get internet. You can get things like, for example, a hardwired internet connection in from the internet service provider, for example, like Cox or Verizon or Frontier, or whoever it may be that's your internet service provider. You can bring in a satellite truck who can bring in additional data. And what's also great is that if you have a really small event, you can do things like bonded hotspots. For example, you take those hotspots you use for your laptop and take like 10 of them and they all connect and feed and back up with each other. Really, really cool stuff these days. There's a lot of different options. It honestly depends on the scale of your event and what is needed, how many connections you need, how many attendees you're going to have. But what's great about this is that all those different types of internet connections can back up each other. When we talk about backups, for example, you can have a hardwired internet connection come in from the ISP. You can have a SAT truck parked out front to make sure that it's super duper backed up. Then you can even have a third party or a third last resort cellular hotspot as backup. There's a lot of really cool things when it comes to it. When the third party comes in, they can do all the additional things. They set up the access points. They can set up the physical lines. They can run all this infrastructure. But that's why you want to make sure that you negotiate this as part of your venue contract. Is some of them will say, oh, you can't be installing access hotspots around what we do. Well, that FCC court agreement that was made says otherwise. But technically, the venue can tell you whatever they want, right? You're kind of a guest on their property. However, they can the third party can bring in all the infrastructure, set it all up. What's also cool as well is that technically you can negotiate as part of your contract is to you that a third party Wi-Fi provider can have access to that hardware and control it themselves. For example, maybe they take the internet connection and then do all the networking access points, everything like that, the hardwired connections. But then, you can also do it where, oh, hey, we can provide the internet and plug it into the existing infrastructure. There's a lot of really cool things that you can do, but the important thing is you have to negotiate out first. I can probably do another 2-hour course on all the different types of ways this can work, but a third-party provider can provide this sort of stuff for you really, really easily and explain it very, very simply. And again, if you want to talk about this a little bit more, here's all my contact information. This is my direct line, my email. Just feel free to shoot me an email, and I'm happy to talk to you guys about this and even provide you more guidance, provide you secondary quotes, all that sort of stuff as well. Really, really quick, Camille, I'm seeing a couple comments along the same lines that I want to kind of address really quick, which is people are saying this is, not friendly for my budget. This is out of my budget for art groups. Is this really costly to do? This is really, to be honest, is a lot cheaper than you think it is. I think the reason why when you hear things like, for example, oh, I should hire a networking liaison, you think to yourself, well, these networking liaisons must be really expensive. I can tell you right now, I think it's okay for me to quote this, is that GameStop says they pay their networking provider something like $2,000 to be there for the entire conference and like $1,000 for the site survey. So for like $3,000, making sure that you have really amazing Wi-Fi when you're spending $30,000 on Wi-Fi might, be really, really a good idea, right? And it obviously depends on the importance of Wi-Fi to your event as well. If you're not doing any event apps, if your audience isn't hugely socially engaged, you have to also ask yourself, like, should I just not provide Wi-Fi? That's an option, and obviously you have to be able to justify that as well. But again, the important thing is it sounds like this is really expensive, but to be honest, so was in-house AV when you didn't have a choice as well. But when you start to bring in the power, you can realize that when you put a vendor next to another vendor and say, hey, this person's providing me the same thing and they're half the cost, you might realize that, for example, we do this all the time when we're getting negotiated against. I have clients who take us and say, hey, we want to use Endless for Wi-Fi. Endless is half the cost. Well, all of a sudden you gave yourself the power to negotiate with the venue, and the venue might come back and say, oh, they're giving it to you for that much? Okay, we'll be willing to give it to you for, way less. And boom, like, oh my gosh, like I'm just so happy you got to save money. I didn't get the business, but sometimes it's just a matter of bringing in that third party to hold them accountable as well. Oh my gosh, there's so many good comments. Camille, what's the next one we want to do? Let's see.
Tanya wants to know, does providing your own Wi-Fi make you liable for data breaches?
Oh, yes, exactly. That's why you want to focus on making sure you have really good security. You want to make sure you have a good security plan. Go check out that webinar that I was talking about a little bit. I believe I'll post it up on there, the bit.ly/connect Wi-Fi security. It definitely does. Yep, it might not be common, but in the near future, it's going to be hugely liable. Just look at that lawsuit that's going against Marriott right now, right? Like they're hugely liable for losing all those people's data. You don't want that to happen to you for sure. I think to follow up on that other question as well, do they need to bring their own insurance? Yep, you need to make sure your third party provider has the same insurance, everything like that. Again, that's where kind of the guarantees and the backup plans and everything like that come in as well, because they are running cables all over the place. They are liable for security breaches, all that sort of stuff. My hope is that no matter what vendor that you use, they have a solid security plan to keeping your data safe. What you'll find now, and as you'll find when you watch this webinar, as we talk about it, is that most people don't even think about this stuff. They don't even ask. And that's why this sort of stuff is happening. So I could probably talk about that one all day long, but definitely, no matter what Wi-Fi vendor you use, they are definitely liable.
All right,
in addition, you might even be liable. So it's something to keep in mind.
Our next question is from Curran. She says, now that most people carry multiple devices, phones, laptops, iPads, is it still reasonable for the AV company to charge per connection?
Again, so Wild West, we can pretty much a hotel, because you sign the contract, they can do whatever they want to do, unfortunately. I hate it because I'm the guy with the laptop, the phone, with the iPad, with the Kindle, and when I go into a hotel, like I need to be able to connect multiple devices, and I get so sad when I have to pay per device. But if you negotiate, you can say, I don't want that to happen. I want it to be one single attendee cost. The important thing is obviously make sure you look at all the other evaluation criteria we talked about, and make sure that that you really look at everything else in addition to that. But yeah, definitely, it's the Wild Wild West. I mean, they can kind of do whatever they want to do. And to be honest, it's also up to you and how you want your attendees to experience to be. If you're, for example, are happy with the cost being passed on to the attendee, that's obviously up to you. So really, really good question. And when I say, Andrea, to clarify something, she said third party, am I saying like my company or third party internet provider? Same thing. So we are a third party internet provider. When you say third party, when I say internet provider or networking provider or third party company, all the same basically words kind of being interchanged there. Obviously, like my company doesn't actually create the internet. I'm not the actual internet service provider, but I'm the one who taps into those resources and brings it. Just like, for example, there might be an electrical vendor. I'm not the one actually creating the electricity, but I'm the one who's doing all the infrastructure, getting it set up, all that sort of stuff, just similar to the in-house internet providers as well. So great question.
Okay, Elizabeth wants to know, how many attendees do you really need to have to make the cost scale affordable?
Depends. For example, if you have 50 attendees, you can sometimes do those bonded hotspot Wi-Fi networks, which really, I mean, they're just so cool in how they work. For example, connecting to AT&T, Verizon, T-Mobile, Sprint, all simultaneously pulling multiple SIM cards, data from all of them. Some of those can handle, 50 attendees pretty easily, as long as you're not needing to, do anything absolutely crazy like 4K live stream. But it is available to do this even small scale and also scale up as well. Obviously, when you have things like the bonded 4G hotspots, you don't have to worry about all the infrastructure, like being able to tap into the existing hardware and things like that, which I saw someone else mention. Samantha said they may/will not allow you to connect to infrastructure. Again, you have to negotiate that out in your contract before you sign it. But if you are forced into it and you've already signed the contract, you only have a little bit amount of attendees, this might be a great option. Granted, though, make sure that you have good cell coverage in that area as well. But yeah, it just all depends. What we find is that the area that a third party really adds value is when your security is the absolute maximum, has to be fantastic. If the reliability has to be amazing, if you have to have a lot of backups, all that sort of stuff, it is really important and really helpful to have a third party, because they're going to kind of go that extra mile with a lot of different things. So Oh my gosh, so many great questions, guys. This is so fantastic.
Wrapping up here, Brian wants to know, is there an advantage to negotiating internet pricing on a per user basis or by using an estimated total Mbps number?
Yeah, megabits per second number. Good question. I think it just depends on if, for example, if you're saying, hey, we're gonna have internet for or let's just say 500 users, I think it's important that you are looking at all the other criteria as well. For example, if they say, yeah, we're gonna provide you internet for 500 people, but it's gonna be, let's say, 1 megabit per second, well, a total of only 500 megabits per second, right? Whereas if, let's say, you negotiate it to be, let's use easy math, 50,000 megabits per second. Oh, wow, now per user it's 100 megabits per second. So as long as you know what the numbers are associated with it, and all the different other criteria aligned with it, and they're not doing, the classic, used car salesman bait and switch where, oh, hey, yeah, the car's $30,000, but your interest rate is 10% a year. Oh, you want the interest rate down? Okay, we'll bring it down to 5%. But then all of a sudden the cost of the car goes up. That bait and switch tactics can sometimes happen. So just make sure that you avoid that.
All right, if we don't have any more questions, we're going to go ahead and wrap up. I want to thank Will so much for sharing this great webinar with us today. A lot of you guys asked questions and got a lot of great feedback. So thank you, Will, and thank you for everyone for participating. After this webinar concludes, you will be directed to a short survey. If you could fill that out, it would be great for us to get some feedback. You can learn about Connect's past and upcoming webinars on all of our websites listed on your screen now. For everyone joining us live today, the credit is pending approval from the EIC. Once the credit is approved, we will email your certificate. Again, if you're watching on demand, please email me for your certificate. It will not come to you automatically, and I will type in my email address again for anyone that needs it. We'll hope you'll join us again on March 27th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for an informative session on sustainability for events with speaker Tom Limburch. Thank you all for joining us, and have a great day, everyone.